This is another ABI video. I am Bill Rochelle, Editor-at-Large for American Bankruptcy Institute, and we are coming to you from ABI's annual spring meeting in Washington, D.C. For the next few minutes, we'll be talking with John Ames, partner in Louisville, Kentucky, with Bingham, Greenbaum, and Dahl. And our subject is going to be veterans' issues in bankruptcy. Now, if you look at Mr. Ames over here, you're probably going to say to yourself, gee, he looks like a leatherneck. Well, indeed, that is true. John was a Marine captain in Vietnam. Thank God he survived, because he's made some wonderful contributions to the ABI ever since. John is a member of the Veterans Affairs Task Force of the ABI, which was formed about 1 year ago. John, tell me, why was it that ABI put together the Veterans Task Force?
Oh, thank you, Bill. Our president, ABI, Ted Gavin, was aware of a problem that existed with veterans who were having financial difficulty. And there was, of the past few years, a discrepancy in how veterans and military disability payments were handled as far as disposable income in Chapter 7s and Chapter 13s versus Social Security, for instance, disability payments.
You mean to tell me that bankruptcy law, as it now sits here, forces someone in Chapter 13 to pay part of their veterans' disability benefits to their creditors?
Yes, sir. That's exactly what it says.
Good
and
grief.
Unfortunately, with BAPSIPA, who prior to that time had it such that the judges had the discretion of determining what became disposable income and what wasn't, the definition of disposable income was altered to include only 4 exceptions. And the exceptions were for Social Security and terrorist attacks and so forth. But not one of those exceptions was the military disability payments. And for a while, bankruptcy judges kind of didn't follow the way the statute was written. It wasn't intended, no one feels, but they didn't feel that they wanted to pursue it. The creditor bar found out about it, and it started to get chipped away, ultimately starting to get appealed. And once you start having decisions where district court judges or appellate court judges would say, we don't necessarily agree with this, but we're not Congress. We can't change that. There are 4 exceptions.
You mean to tell me that somebody could have served in Afghanistan, had his legs destroyed, is on disability, and because of the inability to work, has to go bankrupt, but then loses part of the disability benefits? Is that what happened?
Exactly right. And in terms of disability payments, to be included within the means test of a Chapter 7 might preclude them from being able to take a Chapter 7. Yeah. And if they then have to take a Chapter 13, then that becomes disposable income that has to be paid. So you're exactly 100% correct.
Well, now, did anybody in Congress ever think, gee, we got to do something about this?
They did. Senator Tammy Baldwin, Wisconsin, created an act 2 years ago, I guess it was, and it was called the Haven Act, the Honoring American Veterans in Extreme Need Act. Unfortunately, it didn't go very far because it didn't get a co-sponsor kind of language.
So in other words, if I get it, Congress is always mouthing about how much they care about veterans, especially injured veterans. But here's a bill that would actually done something and nothing happened.
Absolutely correct.
Did there come a time when something did start to happen?
It did, and I'm very proud to say that the folks that were part of this task force helped bring that along. When we were created last April, it took about 4 months to get organized, and we created 5 committees that ultimately are in the task force, one being the legislative committee that was to deal with the Haven Act. And we produced a committee that is termed as the Tigers, the Tiger Team. And that consists of John Thompson I've got to make sure I don't miss anybody. Jay Bender, Holly Petraeus. Holly Petraeus is not an ABI member, but she's working with us.
I gather from the name she has some relation to the general of the same name?
That's correct. Yeah. And she knows everybody in Washington. What a tremendous person. What a tremendous resource. And we have Colonel Katrina Stanger. From New York, oh golly, her name has escaped me now. But we have these folks that come to Washington, and they go up on the Hill, and they make appointments when they can. If they can't, they try cold calls. And it even gotten to the point where during some of the Senate meetings and after hours, they would stand near elevators, and Holly Petraeus would be able to recognize some of the lesser known and photographed senators, and either Jay Thompson or Jay Bender would go over and talk them into coming aboard.
Well, let me ask you this, John. Since the formulation of the task force a year ago, have you been able to encourage any other congresspeople or senators to sponsor the bill?
We have. It's S679. And we had hoped for 4 to 6 co-sponsors. And in the Senate, you traditionally have 1 Democrat per Republican to be co-sponsors, so you have an even number. That number has been steadily rising since they invaded the Hill in January, and it went to 14 to 16. It's now at 20 active, with 30 also consigned and 6 more waiting for the appropriate other party member to come aboard.
Oh goodness, you mean to tell me you're close to having a majority of sponsors?
Correct.
Wow.
That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to really get kicked loose. It's currently in the Judiciary Committee, so it has been introduced. It's in the Judiciary Committee at the moment.
If I recall, he's no longer chairman of the Judiciary, but Senator Grassley is a sponsor?
Yes, and Lindsey Graham is the Judiciary Chair Committee, and we're working with his office, and he's very he's cognizant of it, and I think he'll be willing to help. But as we all know, the United States Senate has many other things going on at the moment, and this is probably not at the head of their line, but it's going to.
It strikes me, though, that this is maybe the one bill this year that could attract support universally from both parties.
Be absolutely, yes.
Because who could possibly vote against veterans?
Amazingly, nobody that we've heard of has expressed any substantive comment that would be implied negatively. Now, what you do have in politics, of course, is you have, and it's been our goal to have this be as clean and focused and narrow a bill as you possibly could have. So you don't have any barnacles, as Holly Petraeus would call it.
No riders stuck on the bill.
Correct. Well, what we're looking at now are people who have favored especially bankruptcy type of legislation, who want to say, well, look, since we're doing this, why don't we just include student loans? Why don't we include other things that are controversial? And once you do that, you've got the death knell for a quick passage of your bill.
Oh, goodness. Well, let's hope that it stays pure and pristine. Well, I got to say, John, this gives me hope, not only with respect to ameliorating the problems of veterans, but, I'm getting the sense that the capacity of Congress to understand the plight of bankrupts should give life to the newly issued ABI Commission report on consumer bankruptcies.
One would think, one would hope.
And maybe this is the way Congress first begins to focus on bankrupts, because there are problems out there as long as your arm that are actually affecting the economy of the U.S. I mean, for instance, student loans, some huge proportion of student loan borrowers are in default, which means they're out of the housing market.
Right.
And that harms the economy as well as those individuals. So there's a lot in that consumer report that could very much help this country
Absolutely.
with negligible effect on anybody else, because you're back at the old subject that you can't get blood out of a rock. And you can not let people discharge debts in bankruptcy, but it's not going to make any difference. If they can't pay, they're not going to be able to pay. But if they're destitute, they're not going to be consumers. It's a terrible mess. Listen, John, we thank you very much for your efforts in this regard. I must say that this is one area where you and fellow members of the ABI are actually helping people. It's a great thing, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. And just as you had mentioned, the other co-chairs, John Penn and Jack Williams, Susan Seabury, and Nancy Rappaport have done an absolutely whale of a job. So anybody out there that would see this that has any interest in contacting their senator or representative and just passing on the thoughts that this is a good thing, please do so.
Well, that's a great idea. Write your representatives and your
That's exactly
senators,
right.
and
Yep.
something will happen. Well, John, we thank you very much for your time.
Thank you,
we
Bill.
thank the audience for listening in, and come back soon and have a look at another ABI video.